For years, I silently endured my son-in-law's mountains of dirty dishes. I never reproached him until one day, in front of everyone, he dared to declare that I wasn't family. What does he know about this house? About these walls, steeped in my life since 1900? My name is Eleanor Thompson, I'm 63, and this is the story of how I found my voice. All my life, I slaved away cleaning other people's houses, my heart aching for my Tiffany. I've been a widow for 38 years, and she's the only thing that's kept me afloat. I never regretted giving up my dreams, as long as she had everything. Year after year, I toiled away in other people's mansions, saving every penny to secure our future. And finally, with great effort, I bought a modest but own house. I registered it in Tiffany's name, believing it was the right thing to do. Mothers don't need titles, only love and gratitude. How wrong I was. That gesture of mine was the beginning of the end. When Tiffany married Brad, a man who looked down on me from day one, my life turned into hell. He came from a lineage that shyly hid its modest roots, like an old, ugly dress. He tolerated me in his home only for selfish reasons, fully aware that I was Tiffany's support, an indispensable help with the housework and financial backing. I, as always, remained silent. But Brad's poisonous remarks began to sting unbearably. The lady who helps us around the house, he cynically introduced me to guests, she's not a family member. She just lives with us. Each of his words pierced my heart like a sharp dagger. I swallowed the lump of resentment and humiliation, sacrificing my pride for my daughter's happiness. I convinced myself that it was all a manifestation of maternal love. I couldn't imagine that the day would come when this luxurious house would cease to be hers and become mine again. After that ill-fated dinner, when Brad contemptuously called me the lady who helps around the house, something irretrievably broke inside me, in that oppressive silence. No one at the table said a word in my defense. My own daughter merely lowered her gaze, as if she were ashamed of his tactlessness, as if I were an embarrassment that needed to be hidden. I put on a fake smile, pretending that nothing had happened, even though a hurricane was raging inside me. That night, I cried in my room, as I had countless times before, choking on the bitterness of humiliation. I lived in the back of the house, in a tiny cubicle that had once been used as a laundry room. There, within those walls, my days passed in a semi-forgetful state, sleep, food, and timid dreams of a better future. Tiffany insisted that it was just a temporary hardship, that everything would be fine soon, and that a decent life awaited me. But the years dragged on, and I felt more and more like a stranger in my own home. I was forbidden to appear in the living room, the dining room, and inviting someone over was out of the question. I became a shadow, silently sweeping the floor, cooking food, and disappearing from view. Brad loved to show off. Expensive things rained down on him as if from a cornucopia. He spoke as if he had personally paid for every brick of this house, even though he hadn't contributed a single peso from his pocket. Once, I inadvertently overheard his conversation, where he boasted that everything depended on him, that without him there would be no stability. I, as always, remained silent, fearing to provoke anger, but each time the truth became more and more obvious. They saw me as a burden, not a mother. But the most painful blow was that Tiffany began to imitate his manner. There was no longer any love in her voice. She addressed me with requests as if I were a servant. Clean Brad's shoes. Make him a green juice, just don't make any noise, he wants to rest. And I obeyed, still clinging to the hope that this was love. But love shouldn't leave such scars. One day, at noon, while I was scrubbing the kitchen stove, I overheard snippets of a conversation that wasn't meant for me, but for which I am now grateful to fate. Brad was speaking in a low voice to Tiffany, but I still heard every word. Your mother is already quite frail. How long are you going to keep her here? It's not your burden. A lump rose in my throat, my hands trembled, convulsively clutching the wet sponge. But she's my mom, Brad, Tiffany protested timidly. In response, he just laughed cynically. Mom? She wasn't even much of a mother. Always at work, never showed up at your school events. You don't owe her anything. Those words pierced my heart like icy daggers. I had done everything for her, so that she would have a better life, and in her memory remained only my omissions, not what I tried to do for her. They continued to discuss my fate as if I were an old, unwanted chest of drawers, a private nursing home on the outskirts of the city, a modest rent so that I could move out and live out my days in silence. They even talked about selling the house. "We're going to move into something bigger anyway. We don't need you anymore." Brad's words sounded like a sentence. I felt paralyzed. My heart was pounding, drumming in my ears like a broken instrument. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching an old blanket as if it could protect me from the icy cold that pierced not from the outside, but from within. The realization struck my heart: I had already been erased from their lives. All that remained was for me to understand this. And that night, I finally understood. The next day, I got up earlier than usual, not because of chores, but because I could no longer bear being under the same roof. In the silence, as always, I prepared breakfast, but I didn't set the table. I left everything on the counter and returned to my room. For the first time, I refused to be someone's servant. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door. It was Tiffany. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, and there wasn't a trace of concern in her voice. "Yes," I replied, not looking up. I had no strength at all. "Brad and I are going to watch a movie at home. Don't cook today." No invitation, no explanation. Just a statement of fact. Cold, detached. She simply passed sentence. They would start a new life, a life where there was no place for me. The door slammed shut, as if a wall had collapsed. I burst into tears, and through the tears came the realization: this is my chance. I grabbed an old, dusty suitcase and filled it with the meager remnants of the past. I walked out, without looking back, without a single word of farewell. I walked through the streets as if in a fog, carrying on my shoulders a burden far greater than that suitcase. A burden of years of silence, sacrifice, love that found no response. I made it to Shirley's house, a childhood friend whom I hadn't seen in ages. When she saw me on the doorstep, there were no questions in her eyes, only understanding. She hugged me so tightly that I thought I would shatter into pieces. That night, I fell asleep on a thin mattress in a simple but cozy room. There was no hint of luxury here, but I felt more at home than I had in years, living under the same roof as my own daughter. The future was uncertain. I didn't know how I would live, how I would earn a living. But one thing was as clear as day: I would not return to where I was considered a stranger in a house that I myself had built. 2 weeks passed, and Tiffany never once remembered me, never called. I waited anxiously for some sign from her, an apology, even the slightest one. But nothing followed. During this difficult time, Shirley became my support. She shared her clothes with me, took me to the market, and helped me find a job. "Eleanor Thompson, you have strong hands and an unyielding spirit. You will show them what you're made of," she said with a warm, sincere smile, instilling hope in me. One day, while sorting through old papers brought in my suitcase, I came across something that sent shivers down my spine. It was a copy of the original deed to the house. Despite the fact that it was registered in Tiffany's name, there was a clause that I had insisted on at the time, when I still trusted her. This clause stated that I could demand the property back if there was evidence of abuse, neglect, or misuse. At that moment, I realized that I still had a powerful trump card in my hands. With a heart pounding wildly, I went to a lawyer recommended by Shirley. I was greeted by a serious man. There was firmness in his voice, but also respect. I told him everything honestly, from the history of buying the house to how I was treated. He listened to me without interrupting, and I saw understanding in his eyes. When I finished, he said, "You have a strong case, but victory favors those who act coldly and methodically, step by step." His words sounded like music, and for the first time in many months of despair, I felt that I was not alone in this fight. Someone believes in me. Sleep eluded me that night. My heart was pounding, overflowing with hope and fear. It wasn't just about getting the house back, it was about reclaiming stolen dignity, about reclaiming my story, my place in the sun. I didn't know how long this battle would take, how many more tears I would have to shed, but an indomitable force awakened within me. I no longer felt like a pathetic, forgotten mother. I am a woman ready to fight for what is rightfully mine. The lawyer threw himself into the work. With unwavering confidence, he began a legal attack. He collected evidence like an archaeologist unearthing artifacts of the past, old receipts, yellowed photographs of the construction of the house, even letters in which Tiffany thanked me for my generosity, for what she said was giving her the house. Every little thing, every detail served as confirmation that it was not a gratuitous generosity, but a forced concession made under certain conditions. There is no place for emotions here, he said, looking me straight in the eye. Facts rule here. Only facts. And the facts were undeniable. I wasn't going to give up. Thanks to Shirley, I got a job as an administrator at an art studio. The salary was modest, but I felt needed, I felt the zest for life. I mastered the computer, confidently answered calls, and greeted students with warmth, like my own grandchildren. My back straightened, my gait became more confident. Gradually, the feeling that I was a burden disappeared. One morning, sorting through papers in the office, I heard my mobile phone ring. It was Tiffany. I hesitated but answered anyway. Her voice was filled with anxiety and confusion. "Mom, are you okay? We haven't heard from you in weeks." I bit my lip, holding back the emotions that were threatening to spill out. "I'm alive, Tiffany, as you can see. And, imagine, I'm happy." There was a pause, and the tone of her voice changed abruptly. "Brad thinks we should talk. Maybe you'll come back if you promise not to cause any problems?" I squeezed my eyes shut so that the anger wouldn't burst out in tears. They missed me. They needed me. They needed me to shut up and sign the papers. But not this time. Never again. I didn't slam the phone down, no. I put it down with dignity, aware of my own worth. After all, when a woman finds herself, no one can erase her from her own destiny. A few weeks later, the phone rang. It was Tiffany, and her voice dripped with sugary sweetness. "Mom, I miss you so much. Maybe we could meet? I'll buy you coffee." Curiosity, not longing, made me agree. We met at a cafe near her work. She was impeccably dressed, but her eyes betrayed anxiety, and her smile remained a strained mask. She hugged me as if those weeks when she had tried to erase me from her life had never happened. After a few minutes of small talk, she got to the point. "Brad and I are planning to sell the house. We're having financial difficulties right now, and, well, since the house is in my name, we need you to sign some papers." Not a hint of embarrassment, as if it were a normal request. I slowly sipped my coffee, staring intently at her. "And where do you suggest I go if you sell the house?" I asked calmly. Her silence was tantamount to an admission of guilt. They hadn't thought about me. Or rather, they had thought about me, but as an annoying obstacle to their well-being. "You could live with Shirley or rent some kind of hovel," she hissed. "You're used to a modest life, aren't you?" Those words pierced me under the ribs like a poisoned spear. Slowly getting up, I took out my wallet and paid for the coffee. "Don't worry, Tiffany," I whispered bitterly in her face. "You'll be hearing news about me soon. Only it won't be the kind you're expecting." And, without looking back, I left the cafe, feeling the treacherous tears stinging my eyes. That same day, I told everything to the lawyer, Mr. Goldman. He listened to me attentively, nodding his head occasionally. In his eyes, I saw unwavering confidence. "Excellent, Miss Thompson," he finally said. "This will play to our advantage. This is no longer just neglect, but direct disinheritance, and we have witnesses." From that moment on, I felt a fragile hope for justice begin to sprout in my heart, timidly but persistently, like a sprout breaking through asphalt. While the lawsuit dragged on, life seemed to start playing for me in new colors. At the academy where I taught English, the students greeted me with genuine warmth, and Senorita Hazel, the painting teacher, once made me an unexpected offer. "Eleanor, dear, wouldn't you like to take painting lessons from me? You have talent, you know." It's free for employees, the offer sounded, and I hesitated and nodded. When was the last time I allowed myself something just for pleasure? Every Tuesday, like a breath of fresh air, I found myself in front of a pristine canvas, and gradually, stroke by stroke, I released everything that had accumulated inside. I painted houses, with roofs soaring upwards, open windows, gardens drowning in flowers. Each stroke was like a brick, restoring what had been destroyed. I felt like a child again, but this time without the oppressive fear. Painting became my refuge, a quiet haven where no one raised their voice, humiliated, or made endless demands. One morning, Shirley showed me Tiffany's post on social media with undisguised sympathy. "Mom abandoned us, after everything we did for her. She's not even sick, she just wanted to leave. We're not perfect, but we've always taken care of her." My face flushed with indignation. Lies, dirty manipulations. But the lawyer's words echoed in my head, no reaction. "Anything you say can be used against you, but their publications can too." And I fell silent. While they were playing their pathetic spectacle for the public, I, gritting my teeth, was preparing my truth in silence. Justice is cooked over a slow fire, and I have learned to wait, I thought, clenching the brush in my hand. The impulsive fool who swallowed insults just to avoid rocking the boat was gone in the past. Now I am steel, knowing the price of every tear shed, and I'm not going to waste them anymore. A month later, Brad and Tiffany received a summons to court, like a bolt from the blue. They were called to testify regarding the ownership of the house. The lawyer said that Brad went into a rage as soon as he read the notice. "How dare this crazy mother-in-law encroach on our house?" he yelled, according to eyewitnesses. In his eyes, I was just an annoying obstacle, naively believing that I had left of my own free will. He couldn't imagine the storm brewing behind my outward submission. That same evening, the phone rang. Tiffany was sobbing hysterically. She said that I was ruining her life, that Brad was furious, that they were going to be thrown out on the street. "Mom, why are you doing this? Don't you realize you're taking away the last thing I have?" Her voice trembled with despair. I listened without interrupting, my face remaining impassive. When her hysteria subsided, I said calmly, like ice, "I'm not taking anything away from you, Tiffany. I'm just taking back what has always rightfully belonged to me. And you know that perfectly well." After that call, silence hung in the air. For several long days, I didn't hear a word from them. Brad, like someone possessed, switched to a tactic of exhausting attacks. Like a shadow, he stalked me with messages from unknown numbers, like a pesky ghost, left notes at the gates of the academy. He even dared to turn to Shirley, trying to use her in his dirty game. But in none of his actions was there a hint of remorse, only a desperate demand to return what never belonged to him. Not a single word of gratitude for the years spent under my protection, in the warmth of my home. The lawyer, like a wise strategist, advised me to keep my distance and record his every move. "These people are not seeking reconciliation," he warned, "they are looking for a loophole to avoid responsibility." And he was right. I armed myself with patience, like a shield. To each of his lies, I responded with irrefutable evidence, to each attack, a legally verified counterstrike. Fear retreated. Now I was fighting not only for the house that had become my refuge, but also for the respect that I had been denied for so long. For the right to my own story. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived. I put on that same white blouse that I wore to Tiffany's graduation. I remember how long I saved up for it, to look presentable in front of my daughter's teachers. Now it has become my armor, a symbol of my determination. I wore it to protect not just property, but the very essence of my life, my story. I entered the courtroom, posture proud, gaze direct, not a challenge, but a manifesto of dignity. For the first time, they saw me not broken, not intimidated. On the other side, as if in enemy territory, sat Brad and Tiffany. He never once deigned to look at me. She, on the other hand, stared without stopping. Her eyes were red from tears, her face haggard. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but then all those moments when she turned away, when her husband slandered me, flashed through my memory. I remembered the sleepless nights spent in that miserable cubicle, which they graciously called the guest room, and the pity vanished. The judge gave the floor to each side. My lawyer spoke clearly, confidently, as if coining each word. He presented irrefutable evidence, documents, testimonies, receipts, old photographs where I, sparing no effort, carried bags of cement on a par with the builders, building this house with my own hands. Then he moved on to the main thing, the abuse, neglect, the attempt to deprive me of everything I deserved. Tiffany tried to object, but the judge abruptly cut her off. "Your time will come, Señora." When Brad spoke, his voice was filled with contempt. He stated that I was mentally unbalanced, that I had abandoned the house because of my bad temper, that I was mired in resentment because I had no life of my own. And most importantly, that the house belonged to him by right, and I was just his wife's mother, no one. There was such undisguised hatred in his words that I involuntarily clenched my fists, trying to remain calm. I bit my lip, holding back a triumphant smile. Each of his words became a shovel, digging a grave for his excessive pride. Just a few days after the hearing, the lawyer stunned me with joyful news. The judge ordered a thorough investigation of his assets and demanded to provide irrefutable evidence of the origin of the funds spent on the purchase of the house. This was exactly the blow we were waiting for, because we had everything: bank transfers, receipts for cash contributions, even touching letters in which Tiffany thanked me for turning her cherished dream into reality. Brad, cornered, desperately tried to use old connections. He ran to some acquaintance in the mayor's office, but to no avail. The case had already received wide publicity, and several neighbors were called to testify. To my surprise, Mrs. Beatrice Thompson came forward on her own accord. She told the court how she saw me returning home every night with hands sore and cracked from cleaning other people's houses, and how, full of pride, I spoke about the house I was building for my beloved daughter. The pressure of this situation began to weigh heavily on Tiffany. From Brenda, a former colleague, I learned terrible things. Apparently, she was shedding rivers of tears right at work, unable to concentrate on anything. She was always surrounded by a gloomy aura. And Brad, according to her, had begun to drift away. Arguments were constantly erupting between them. He accused her of not being able to control me, of allowing me to think I had any rights. It was then, as she confessed, that she first truly saw what a monster she had married. And I kept painting. But now my paintings were bursting with color. Saturated reds, like molten flames, blazing yellows, blues that no longer drowned in sadness. Because, although there was a battle raging outside, there was no longer a war within me. It was liberation. Every step I took carried me further away from the past and closer to the woman I had always been, but who had been sleeping so soundly for so long. One morning, rummaging through my things at the academy, I heard a call. Unexpected. An unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. It was Brad's lawyer. His voice, dry and arrogant, like sand, poured through the speaker. He offered me a settlement. They wanted me to relinquish any rights to the house in exchange for a laughable sum. "It's to avoid a scandal, Señora," he sneered. I imagined his haughty face and barely suppressed a smirk. "Everyone wins," his words echoed in my head. Laughter, bitter and ironic, escaped against my will. After they tore my heart out, now they offer me a paltry handout for silence? "Tell your client," I said, each word etched in the air, "that they have already created the scandal. I am only demanding justice." And, without giving him a chance to recover, I hung up. For the first time in years, my voice sounded like steel. No treacherous trembling in my throat, no corrosive guilt. I was no longer going to apologize for demanding what was rightfully mine. Being a mother does not mean being a slave. It means being human. That same day, my lawyer shared a ray of hope with me. "We have received a preliminary court order. Any attempts to sell the property are frozen until a final verdict is reached." This meant that their dirty hands could no longer reach our house. They couldn't sell it, mortgage it, or move a single piece of paper. Brad was cornered, and he knew it. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any words. And then, as if an apology, as if an admission of guilt, Tiffany sent me a handwritten letter. Words begging for forgiveness tormented me. She excused herself for not knowing how to protect me, confessed to cowardice, to submitting to her husband's will. But, Mom, I'm still your daughter, the lines trembled in her letter. Tears blurred my eyes, but they were not tears for her, but for me. This time, her apology rang hollow. Forgiveness would have to be earned. The second hearing was fraught with tension. Tiffany appeared alone. Brad was absent. Whispers circulated that he was frantically searching for a separate lawyer, having lost faith even in his own. The judge gave Tiffany the floor. She rose, and her voice trembled treacherously. She babbled about some family misunderstanding, assured there was no malicious intent. Every word seemed to catch in her throat, betraying a lie. My lawyer was adamant. We are not here because of a misunderstanding. We are here because a woman was cynically used, humiliated, and almost deprived of her only property. The judge nodded briefly, confirming his position. When he addressed me, I stood up, feeling my heart pounding in my chest like a trapped bird. But this time I stood my ground. I spoke slowly, without a single tear, drawing from the depths of my soul the bitter truth that I had accumulated over the years. Your Honor, I said, and my voice, despite the inner trembling, sounded firm. I built this house with my own hands. I registered it in my daughter's name, driven by maternal love. But love without respect is not love at all, but cruel violence. I was treated like a servant, like a burden. I was told that I was a stranger here. And if that's true, then the house doesn't belong to them either. A ringing silence fell in the room, so much so that I could hear the breathing of everyone present. The judge, after listening to me carefully, announced the end of the hearing and promised to issue a final verdict as soon as possible. At the very doors of the courthouse, Tiffany caught up with me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she whispered, barely audible, "Mom, forgive me." I was silent. My gaze was cold and detached, as if I were looking at a stranger. At that moment, it dawned on me that I had lost not only a daughter. I had lost faith in the idea that love could heal all wounds. Sadly, that's not always the case. A week later, the judge announced his decision. It was clear and just. The house should be returned to me by law. The basis for this decision included documents confirming the origin of the funds, evidence of forced cohabitation, and testimonies of emotional abuse. The lawyer spoke these words, and I froze. No triumphant cry, no tears of relief, just silence, enveloping me as I closed my eyes and filled my lungs with air. It was peace, long awaited and clear. Brad, on the other hand, like an enraged child, unleashed his anger on everything around him. He smashed things, spewed insults at Tiffany, threatened to leave, and, to my surprise, kept his word. As far as I know, he simply packed his belongings and vanished into the night, leaving my daughter alone and deep in debt. The house they had clung to so desperately, considering it their own, now had to be vacated within a month. They couldn't sell it, and they couldn't stay. In the end, they were left with nothing, paying the price for their contempt towards the one who had given them everything. Then came a call from Tiffany. Through tears, she babbled about regrets, about not knowing what to do next, that her husband had left her, that she had nowhere to live. "Mom," she pleaded, "please, just a room, let me come home." I listened to her, out of respect for the years we had shared, but no pity stirred within me. Calmly, without a hint of gloating, but firmly, I replied, "You chose to defend the man who humiliated me. Now defend yourself." And with that, I ended the call, not out of revenge, but out of the need to set boundaries. Because I finally understood, forgiveness doesn't mean going back to where you were broken. Forgiveness isn't always reconciliation, sometimes it's liberation, when you say, "Never again." I am no longer the broken woman who hid from tears in that miserable little room. Now this house breathes with me again, with my strength. The day the keys were placed in my palm, I stood before the door, as if before an abyss. Yes, it was still the same house, but the pain had receded. It was no longer a symbol of my submission. Now it was a trophy, won in a battle I didn't choose but won with my head held high. With determination in every step, I crossed the threshold, like a traveler returning home after years of wandering. Inside, chaos reigned, dust, desolation, weeds ran rampant in the yard, and the walls bore the mark of neglect. But it didn't matter. I was back. I was home. Quietly turning on the music, I began to clean. In my hand, a broom, and in my soul, the serenity I had forgotten for so many years. Every corner whispered, "We've been waiting for you. How good it is that you've returned." Without wasting time, that same week I called a handyman to breathe new life into the house. I transformed the house, the walls shone with warm colors, the furniture changed its appearance, and the windows, once tightly closed, opened to the sun. I let in light, breathed life into this space that had so long held the silence of my suffering. And I myself, like a flower under the rays of the sun, began to bloom. No more sacrifices, no more lives lived for others. Now, only for myself. One evening, sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee and a portrait of my mother in my hands, I spoke to her softly, as in childhood. "Mom," I whispered, "all my suffering, all the sacrifices were not in vain. Now I understand how important it is to rise, not only because of what was taken from me, but also because of what I can still create. I have a life, and this time it belongs to me." Gradually, the house came to life. Roses bloomed in the front garden, new curtains appeared on the windows, and my paintings adorned the walls. In every detail, my soul, my mark. No longer a house of humiliation, but a refuge, a space free from shouts, contempt, and forced separations. One day, a neighbor, admiring my house, said, "Donna Eleanor Thompson, it looks more beautiful than ever." "Now it definitely has a soul," I whispered, feeling it with every cell. At night, when the world plunged into silence, I lit a candle in the dining room. Its flickering light snatched my table and an old notebook from the darkness. These were not memories full of bitterness, not complaints about fate, and not reproaches to the past. No, these were fragments of the unsaid, words that had accumulated in my soul for years, never finding an outlet. Sometimes I wrote letters. Letters that were never destined to leave the confines of my room. One, for Tiffany, full of bitterness and disappointment. Another, for Brad, steeped in contempt and pain. And one, the most important, for myself. "Thank you for not breaking," I wrote with a trembling hand. This phrase, simple and short, was the most sincere of everything I had ever written. Soon a letter came from Tiffany. The last one. She wrote about her divorce from Brad, about how her world, built on lies, deceit, and manipulation, had collapsed. She begged for help, asked for advice on how to start with a clean slate. Not a new home, no, she just needed wise counsel. For several days, I pondered her words, weighing all the pros and cons. Finally, I wrote a reply. I told her that starting over was possible, but she shouldn't count on my support. She would have to learn to live with the consequences of her decisions, with what she had allowed herself and others to do. These words were not easy for me. Each one echoed with pain in my heart. But they were necessary. If I learned anything from this story, it's that setting boundaries is not cruelty, but an act of self-love. It's a way to protect your heart and soul from those who are willing to trample them without regret. And I will no longer allow anyone to do that. After years of selfless love for others, a love that burned me to ashes, I finally began to love myself. And I will not allow anyone to control this love. Over time, my story spread throughout the neighborhood. Some neighbors came to visit, bringing pies and kind words. Others, passing by, simply whispered words of support. "You are so brave, Mrs. Eleanor Thompson," they said. And although I didn't feel like a heroine at all, I understood that many women saw their reflection in me. How many of us, mothers who have given too much, have been silenced, used, and thrown overboard? One evening, I received an unexpected invitation. The Senior Women's Association asked me to share my story at their small gathering. At first, I wanted to refuse. I was paralyzed by shame, the fear of public speaking crippled me. But something inside me persistently whispered yes. Maybe because I realized that this was not just my story, it was an echo of the fates of many women. And if I had the opportunity to voice it, I had to do it. At the appointed hour, I sat before a dozen women. Some leaned on canes, their hands trembled, revealing their age. In their eyes, I saw a reflection of what they had experienced, a glimmer of hope and fear. I took a deep breath, and the words flowed on their own. I laid everything bare, not hiding a single detail. I started with the day Brad threw in my face that I was a burden and brought it up to the moment when I triumphantly reclaimed my house. The room was silent, no one dared to interrupt me. I saw tears silently rolling down the cheeks of some of the women. And then, when I finished, one of them came up to me, squeezed my hand tightly, and said with a trembling voice, "Thank you. Thank you for reminding me that I'm still worth something. That it's not too late to get back what is rightfully mine." That night, returning to my home, I lit an old lamp and placed it on the windowsill. Let it burn, I thought, let its light be seen from afar. Let everyone who passes by know that in this house, in my house, lives a woman who has risen from her knees and will no longer allow herself to be trampled. Several months passed. One day, walking downtown, I suddenly saw Brad. He was walking on the other side of the street, somewhat haggard, disheveled, with a grimace of bitterness on his face. Our eyes accidentally met. For a split second. He immediately averted his eyes, extinguished and full of defeat, and abruptly turned into a side street. No words, no reproaches, no screams, nothing. Before me was a broken man. And you know what I felt? For the first time, not fear, not hatred, but only indifference. Because there are battles that are simply not worth remembering. They are so insignificant that even remembering them is a waste of energy. Tiffany, as a friend told me, was crammed into a tiny apartment with her son, whom she was raising alone. She worked in some little shop and kept saying that she was trying to start life with a clean slate. I don't know how sincere her words were, but I sincerely hoped that she had changed. Not for me, for herself. After all, better late than never. And if the pain she experienced became an awakening for her, then perhaps all is not lost. I continued to enjoy the quiet flow of my days. Bougainvillea bloomed profusely in the garden, and the walls of the living room were increasingly covered with my canvases. One day, one of the academy students approached me with a request to sell him my painting. I just smiled in response and gently refused. I painted it the day I came back home. It's priceless. It was my personal way of capturing newfound freedom. And every night, plunging into darkness, I whispered to myself, "You did it, Eleanor Thompson." After all, it wasn't easy. No one offered me a helping hand. I had to stop waiting for rescue and pull myself out of the abyss. Not everyone can understand my path, but those who have once been silenced know the true price of being able to speak and, most importantly, to live life to the fullest. A year after returning home, I felt a shaky balance, but simple survival was not enough for me. The thirst for life, the desire to flourish, pushed me to create a small art corner in one of the rooms. Light curtains fluttered in the breeze, an old radio quietly hummed melodies, and brushes, lovingly laid out on the table, waited for their time. Every morning, upon entering, I would reconnect with my former self, the one that had been taken from me, and the one I was patiently, piece by piece, rebuilding. And then, one Saturday,